scribes. And they've all been, except for the week Wilbur preached, the scribe had a legitimate question that Jesus and him got into a conversation with. But for the most part, most of the approaches that the religious leaders have had to come into Jesus and interacted with him is trying to trick him or to trap him into saying something they can use against him. And so Jesus will now turn his attention to the crowd and speak to them in a warning, telling them to beware of the scribes and the religious leaders' tendencies. And so that's where we find ourselves in verse 38 in Mark 12. It says, in his teaching, Jesus is teaching to the crowd, he said, beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and like greetings in the marketplaces and have the best seats in the synagogues and the places of honors at the feast. They devour widows' houses and for a pretense make long prayers. They will receive greater condemnation. And so what he's telling the crowd is, look, I'm warning you against what you're what you're observing within the religion of your culture, and the example that the scribes are setting, because they weren't practicing daily what they were telling or preaching to the crowds. They weren't focusing their attention on the worship of God. They were stuck in man-made traditions and religion and the traditions of men. And so as we just sang, it's like, Lord, we don't want to get stuck there, but we have to recognize our culture brings things into our lives that we kind of gloss over, and our religious culture brings that in too, our Western Christianity. Because there's things that go on in the Western church that the people of the East would be like, we don't get that. We don't understand how you guys got there, right? And so it's easy for us to do a culture drift or a mission drift away from what the scriptures say. And so it's always good to be reminded of, hey, we need to reevaluate personally why we do what we do. And then as a church family, why we do what we do. And so that's what Jesus is basically saying, like, open up your heart to what you do and make sure that what you do is not for self, like self-serving or self-indulgent or seeking a status, either individually or as a church family, but that we fear God and that we honor God in all that we do, and we do it for his glory. And so these guys weren't doing it. The scribes weren't doing it. And they would dress up in a garb that would set them apart. They would, he said, make pretense through holy or long prayers in public. We think about the Pharisees' prayer about, thank you, God, I'm not like this tax collector or this sinner. And he said that out loud, and the tax collectors huddled in a corner, praying silently, oh, Lord, have mercy on me. God's like, there's a big difference of those two things that are going on. And so Matthew brings a little bit more insight because he was writing to the Jewish audience. So Mark's writing to the Gentiles. Matthew digs a little bit more into it with the Jewish audience. And in Matthew 23:5, he says, the scribes do all their deeds to be seen by others, for they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long. And so we don't use those words, right? Phylacteries and fringes. And so I dug a little bit more into that to say, well, what does that look like? Like, Jesus said that they want to be seen by men. They walk around for honor. They walk around in their long robes. But Matthew's like, no, it's just not their long robes. It's the phylacteries. And I'm like, okay, I got to go there. We're going to chase a rabbit real quick. So the phylacteries were small leather cases strapped to the forehead and the left arm and to the robes, all right? And so God actually told them to do this. The phylacteries he told them in Deuteronomy 6:8, you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as the frontlets between your eyes. We're like, okay, so just picture that, right? You got these small leather cases on your forehead. But it wasn't like literally strapped on your forehead, like, let me just put it here. It was on their robes. And so God told them to use 4 of these things, 4 phylacteries, and put them on the frontlets of their robes. And so traditionally, they wore those as a reminder of the 4 morning prayers. And so, yes, I'm glad you asked. What are those 4 morning prayers? The first 2 were regarding their exodus from Egypt. Because God always said, I want you to remember what I brought you out of so that you can not go back into that slavery. And what did they do when they got out of Egypt? Like, they're like, whoa, we had it so good in Egypt. We should go back, right? And we do the same thing. Like, God brings us out of something and we're like, well, it wasn't that bad. I can go back to that. And he's like, do you not remember how much enslaved you were to that? Especially when we talk about today, the praise of man. And so the first 2 was to remind them coming out of Egypt. The first one was Exodus 13. And I just thought I'd read them to you, all right? Exodus 13, 1 through 10. The Lord said to Moses, consecrate to me all the firstborn, Whatever is the first to open the womb among the people of Israel, both of man and of beast, is mine. Then Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you came out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. For by a strong hand the Lord brought you out from this place. No leavened bread should be eaten. Today in the month of Abib you are to go out. And when the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, which is the land of Canaan, which he swore to your fathers he would give, a land flowing with milk and honey, you shall keep this service in this month. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and on the seventh day there shall be a feast to the Lord. Unleavened bread shall be eaten for the 7 days. No leavened bread shall be seen with you, and no leaven shall be seen with you in all your territory. You shall tell your son on that day, it is because the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt, and it shall be to you a sign on your hand, as a memorial between your eyes, the frontlets, and to the law of God, the Lord, may be in your mouth. For I am a strong hand, the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this statute as its appointed time from year to year. And so is the reminder of the Passover, which is what Jesus is actually going to celebrate in a couple days. And then after the Passover was the 7 days of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And so the first frontlet was to say, remember the Passover, that the houses were spared by the death angel because they applied the blood to the doorpost, and the death angel passed over them, but all the other firstborn were claimed by the death angel. And so God said, so the firstborn are mine. But remember that all came about because I brought you out of the land of Egypt through the Passover. The second one was specifically to remind them that the firstborn was there. So it's the next 6 verses after Exodus 1 through 10. It's Exodus 13, 11 through 16. When the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, which is the promised land, as he swore to you and your fathers, and shall give it to you, you shall set apart to the Lord all the first opens the womb, all the firstborn of your animals that are males shall be the Lord's. Every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb, or it will be not redeemed if you break its neck. Every firstborn of man among you your son shall you redeem. And when in time you come to your son asks you, what does this mean? You shall say to him, by the strong hand of the Lord brought us out of Egypt from the house of slavery. For when Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of animals. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord all the males that first open the womb, but all the firstborn of my sons I redeem. It shall be a mark on your hand or the frontlets between your eyes, for by a strong hand the Lord breaks us out of Egypt. And so it's interesting that as they wore these, that the reminder was when your son comes to you and says, what are you doing? That you say, the Lord delivered us. The Lord set us free. And so in the same way, he wanted to continue that. The third was the Shema, which we looked at last week, and that comes out of Deuteronomy 6, verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, and the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And these words that I command you shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk to them when you sit in your house, and when you walk in the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You will bind them as a sign on your hand. They shall be a frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And so again, the Shema was the proclamation that we believe in the one true God, the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And when your kids come and ask you about that you're able to give an answer for that. And so the fourth one was God's promise over Israel and over his kids of what obedience would look like if we follow through with these reminders. And so Deuteronomy 11, verse 13, it says, and if you will indeed obey my commandments that I command you today, to love the Lord your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, he will give you the rain for your land in the season, and early rain and the later rain, that you may gather in your grain and your wine and your oil. And he will give you grass in your fields for your livestock, and you shall eat and be full. Take care lest your heart be deceived, and you turn aside and serve other gods and worship them. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will shut up the heavens, so that there will be no rain, and the land will yield no fruit. And you will perish quickly off the good land and the Lord has given you. You shall therefore lay up these words of mine in your heart and in your soul, and you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be frontlets between your eyes. You shall teach them to your children, talking of them when you're sitting at your house, when you're walking by the way, and when you lie down and when you rise. You will write them on the doorposts of your house and on the gates. and your days and the days of your children might be multiplied in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers to give them, as long as the heavens are above the earth. And so God gave them these 4 verses to say, I want them to put between your eyes, between the frontlets, right? I want to put them on the doorpost of your house, but it's not just there. I want them in your heart, and I want you to teach them to your kids. And so God told all of Israel to do this. But the religious leaders were the ones that were doing it, and they were wearing the fringes of their garments. They weren't just doing 4 of these things. They were doing a bunch. But before we get there, just ask yourself, if you were to spend a little bit of time with the Lord and think about the purpose of these scriptures, right? To remind us, to teach to our children, and to always be in front of us, what 4 scriptures would you pick? What 4 scriptures would you be like, you know what, these are really close to my heart, and I want them not just for myself, right, to be reminded daily of, but I want these to be able to speak into my kids' life or into my grandkids' life. And so spend a little bit of time this week of going, what are my top 4 that I would not, like we're not coming in next week with leather cases on our like coats or foreheads, right? But in our heart, God says, my new covenant is I write the word on your heart, right? And so in our new covenant, just say, God, what 4 scriptures would you highlight from our heart? And then could you open up doors that I can share those with my kids, or share those with my coworkers, or share those with my friends, or share those with my grandkids, or the neighborhood kids, or the kids that come over to my house and play, right? To just highlight what that might look like for this season. Because those 4 verses will probably change over weeks or months or years even. But just to be able to say, you know, what top 4 could I have on the forefront of my head when I get out of bed, or when I associate with my family or with my kids or with my grandkids? Just a thought. So the Pharisees, they had this mentality, well, if everybody's supposed to do 4, then we have to set ourselves apart. And if 4 is required on the hem of our garment or at the robe, then what's wrong with not just doing the entire fringe? And so you think about a robe, it goes from the floor to the shoulders, back down to the floor. They had these phylacteries all the way around. And you know what they're looking for, right? Oh man, that's amazing. Like, you probably know all those scriptures. You probably are closer to God because you have all those scriptures on you, which is not true, right? But they wanted to stand apart from the common man. And so the scribes in particular did this. I think all the religious leaders probably caught up on it because Jesus calls out all of them out, which we'll get to in a little bit. But they had this goal in doing these things that they were doing to not just set themselves apart, but to set them above the people, to appear more religious or more closer to God. And Jesus is just calling them out going, it's just not true. What you do on the outside is not going to make you any closer to God. Just when he called out and he goes, you're spending a lot of time cleaning the outside of the vessel, but you're not even considering what's going on in the inside of the heart. And so in the same way as right before Jesus is going to the cross, he's given this last-ditch push to the crowd going, beware of these guys and beware of the religion that has caused this system to bring us so far apart from taking Scripture out of context to becoming this tradition of man. And he goes, but it doesn't stop with how they dress. They want to be commended in the greetings of the marketplace. They want to get the best seats when they go to the synagogue. They want to be honored at the feasts and in public. But inwardly, what's going on inside of them is not good. They're devouring widows' houses, and when they pray, they're praying in pretense, which means they're praying hypocritically. Like, I'm going to pray for this, but I'm praying for this with a motive to get something else. And so Jesus says, beware. In Matthew, Matthew takes it way deeper and just calls out the different woes that Jesus proclaimed over the religious leaders. He's like, look, I'm going to tell you straight up that the woe of God, you think about the woe of God that Jesus is proclaiming over the religious leaders, is like the woe that the angels proclaim over the earth in the book of Revelation. These woes are judgment. These woes are, you better change what's going on or the judgment of God's coming. And so Jesus tells them very clearly that God is going to not just brush over what they're doing in drawing people away from him, but he's going to bring them back through his son, and he's going to condemn what they're doing. And so in Matthew 13, I didn't list them. I didn't count them, but I forget how many there were. But the woes to the religious leaders, he says that they're hypocrites because they shut the King of Heaven in people's faces. Woe to the hypocrites, for they travel far to proselytize someone to make them a child of hell. Like, he's saying this to them. The religious ritual was over worship and fear of God. He condemned them as woe as blind guides, for they swear by some things but not by others. So what they were swearing by is like the gift on the altar but not the altar, or the temple but not the things of the temple. And they were playing games with the people's prayers and with their hearts. He proclaimed woe to them as hypocrites in tithing details like mint and cumin, but neglecting justice, mercy, and faithfulness, that they obsessed with the minor things while they excluded the things that honor God. He called them hypocrites for looking good on the outside, which we've already talked about, but they're dead on the inside. They outwardly appear righteous and clean, but inwardly their hypocrisy and lawlessness is in their heart. And then he called out their hypocrisy for honoring the prophets with monuments that their fathers killed, which is what they're saying is they built monuments for past prophets that were martyred. And they're like, we never would have done that, right? And he's like, but you're going to kill the Son of Man, the Son of God. And so you say that you wouldn't have murdered the prophets, but you're going to do worse by killing the Son of God, the Messiah. In those woes, in this proclamation that the scribes and the Pharisees are right next to Jesus as he's talking to the crowd about beware of these guys, they continually had these opportunities to have a change of heart, to repent, to go, man, maybe we've missed God on this religion thing. Maybe we should open up our hearts to what Jesus is saying. But every time he pronounced woes or he condemned them publicly, they double down. And they're just like, we got to get rid of this guy. Because nowhere in their hearts is this opportunity for them to go, maybe we missed it somewhere. And in the same way, we do the same thing when God's kind of pricking our hearts about something, and we have this opportunity to go, maybe I should open my heart to what he's like really gnawing on me about. And we can either go that way or we can just double down and go, no, you know what? I really think this is the way I should go, and I'm going to double down and I'm going to continue going this way. And God will always be like, okay. But I'll be here when you get to the end of that. But it's so much better to open up our hearts when he starts pricking or starts whispering or starts clearing his throat than to wait till we double down and get to the end of that road, right? And so these guys were preaching one thing and doing another thing. And so Jesus continually to tell the crowd, like, you, in Matthew 23:3, do and observe whatever they tell you, but do not do the works that they do. And I'm thinking that's probably the biggest condemnation of the religious leaders at the time, when Jesus straight up told the crowd, hey, what they're teaching, you should do. But what they do, please don't follow that example. Versus Paul being able to say to the church, hey, follow my example as I follow Jesus. Like, I'm walking along with Jesus, and I'm trying to do the best I can, and I am trying to live a life that's worthy as an example for you to follow, which is exactly what God wants us to do as we parent, as we grandparent, as we're walking through our jobs, and we're coworkers and seniors above us and people below us. He wants us to be an example as we follow Christ. That they would be able to go, I'm going to negotiate this contract just like so-and-so would have negotiated it. With honesty and with integrity and with character. And we set an example of, this is the culture that I want our department or our division or our office to operate under. That we can stand and go, but because it's not about me, I'm just following Christ. And as I follow Christ, I want to set that example. And Jesus says, these guys aren't doing that. So look for a different example. And he's standing right in front of him and he goes, I'm a good one. And so if we don't have that example in our lives, we can't look to say, man, I have somebody that I can follow their example. Jesus goes, it's okay. I'm your example. And just get to know me better and understand my heart and open up your heart to my spirit as I teach you and I counsel you and I help you through situations That you don't have to look to man all the time. If you don't have someone to look to me. If you have someone to look to, praise God, but don't put all your eggs in that basket. Continue to look to me and follow my example. And so after Jesus tells the crowd of what not to do, like don't follow these guys' example, he then pulls his disciples apart, which he kind of separates from the crowd a little bit. And he says, you want an example to follow? I'm going to show you one, which we don't really think of in the context of when we talk about this interaction between Jesus and his disciples. But in verse 41, Jesus brings the disciples apart from the crowd, and he sits down opposite of the treasury, and he watched the people put in money into the offering box. So it'd be like you guys doing your thing, right? And I call 3 or 4 people or a group into the corner, and we're like, hey, watch that box in the back. Like, this is kind of weird, Jesus. Why are we doing this? Like, that's between them and God. Why would we, like, isolate ourselves and just zero in on that little box back there? Jesus has got a plan. And as they watch people putting in the money into the offering box, it says many rich people put in large sums. And they're just like, well, that's how it works, right? God says, put in the money, and these people are putting in the money. But then in verse 42, a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which make a penny. He called the disciples to him, and he said to them, truly I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty has put in everything she had, all that she had to live on. And so they're watching this procession of people putting in their offering into this temple treasury box. So we got a picture of what that looks like. And the treasury box had this big, like it's like a funnel, right? And so you think about, you take your change into Publix and you throw it in that big funnel thing, and it counts your change, and you're like, oh, you get $15 back. And you're like, yes, right? But when you throw it in there, it makes a lot of noise. And that's made of plastic. This is made out of brass. And so what people would do is they would come and they would bring large amounts of money, but they wouldn't like use big denominations if they want to be showful about what they're giving. And so if I want to bring 1 billion pennies to show how much money I'm contributing, right? I'm going to make sure I throw that in for a long time in a way that makes a big presentation. And that's kind of what Jesus was saying, is these people are putting in large amounts of money. There were some people that are looking around going, hey, look at me, and making a splash into the temple treasury box. I probably shouldn't tell this story, but we went to a wedding Friday night, and Cameron's like, I really want to tip the bartenders. And so he's like, but all I got's a 20. And we're like, we'll hook you up. Like, we'll contribute towards that fund, right? And so we were making a joke of it because Cameron's like so under the radar, low key. And now I owe him $1 for saying his name a couple times. But as he put the money into the bartender's little box, we said, well, did they see? And he goes, And his brothers busted on him like, dude, if you're putting a 20 into the bartender's box, you're supposed to let them see that because then they're going to hook you up the rest of the night. Well, it's an open bar. Like, it doesn't matter if they hook them up the rest of the night. But it was just reminding me that in Cameron's like demeanor, right? He doesn't want to be seen under the radar. So he just kind of slides it in and nobody sees it. And Jesus is like, that's a good thing. But we were like, you're kind of like going, you should have walked up and gone, hey, where's the tip box, right? And then dropped it in. It was like, there goes your reward. But it's a difference between what is my goal, what is my heart behind this? And Cameron's just like, they're working hard and they should be compensated a little bit extra for that because they're doing a great job. Versus, I want to make a big splash and I want them to see me so that when they see me the next time, they'll take care of me. And that's exactly what was going on in this temple treasury box. That if I make a big splash at the box, when the next time somebody sees me, they're like, oh, that guy, he gives a lot of money. And they're seeing a lot of people do this. Many rich people put in much large sums. Matthew 6:2. When you give to the needy, sound no trumpet before you. The hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. That was an early teaching of Jesus. Now he's got a couple days left before he goes to the cross, and he goes, I really want to make sure my disciples get this. He wasn't preaching to the crowd. He calls his guys across and apart, and he says, I want you to get this lesson before I leave. Now, there were 13 of these collection boxes across the court of the women, which was like the public space. And each box had a specific purpose. And we don't know which box Jesus chose to station himself to watch this going on. It was probably the general box, right? The general fund. But there were a lot of people putting in a lot of things. But Jesus zeroes in on this woman who we say poor. We're like, well, she was poor. She didn't have much. No, she was abject poor. Like she didn't have anything. That we could seriously say these 2 coins was probably all she had in monetary. Like she had the clothes on her back. She may have had a place to live. And the coins are little mites, like the widow's mite. We grew up hearing that. And when we went to Israel, we got these little whites, and they're like this big. And they're so small, I don't know where mine is, right? But she put in 2, and it equals like a penny. And for most of us, we'd be just like, so what? The counters would be like, what do we do with these, right? Like, they don't even equal a penny. What do you want us to do with these? I was like, we should probably like enshrine them and honor them, right? But that's not the point. Jesus says she gave out of abject poverty, and she's giving all. She put in everything she had, all that she had to live on. And that's what Jesus zeroes in on. He goes, I'm going to teach you new math. This widow's 2 mites is worth more than all the money you've seen put into this treasury box. And we don't know if they sat there for 10 minutes or an hour or several hours. But he's saying all the money you've seen going into these boxes don't equal these couple of pennies. And they would say, why? How? And he says, because she put in everything that she had. All that she's got to live on, she's given to the Lord, and now she's completely 100% dependent on him to provide what's next. And then he turns to us and we're like, yeah, we don't give like that, right? I mean, for most of us, we give out of an abundance, or we get out of a planned set pattern of this is what we're going to give, because we've like disciplined ourselves to put aside the first fruits and we're going to give it to the Lord. But if we compare what we give to what was left over, there's no way it compares to what she did. And he's not saying that we're supposed to just like cash out all our bank accounts and sell our house and sell our clothes and go to the thrift shop and consign all we have to give to the back table. He's saying in our hearts, we have to be completely dependent on him. And we have to live in praise to him, in honor to him, in thanksgiving to him with everything we do. And as she contributed in secret, that we should do the same thing. But it's not just about money. It's about everything that we do. Because God views our giving to him, whether it's our giving of our money or the giving of our time or the giving of ourselves, in proportion to what we have. And I told the guys at CETA at the rescue mission a couple weeks ago, we've all been given the same hours, right? Nobody has more hours in the day than anybody else. And so in that way, we're all playing from an equal footing. Now, financially, we've all been given different things. Our houses, we've been given different things. Our workplaces, we've been given different responsibilities and different roles. But when it comes down to our time, God says everybody's allotted the same amount of time. And so the proportion of what we give back to him is how he measures that. And for the most part, we give out of, like, I say the leftovers, but the excesses of our day or the excesses of our life. And Jesus says, in his last public teaching to his disciples, here's an example from the religious leaders. Don't follow that one. Here's an example from a woman who has nothing. That's the one I want you to follow after. Those guys, they do their thing to be praised by men or to be praised by their people. This woman had one sole focus. Her only desire was to be devoted to the Lord and to give him what she had, knowing, trusting, having a relationship with him, that if I do this, he's got me. And he's going to follow through because he's always been faithful. And just as no one noticed it in the world, who noticed it? Only Jesus. The disciples wouldn't have caught it if he hadn't have said, come over here, sit down, and focus on the box. And so the only thing that matters about this act that this woman, this widow, performed was that Jesus noticed it. And so when we do our thing, sometimes we want to be, appreciated by other people or praised by other people. Not in a bad sense, just like, could you just acknowledge that I'm actually doing something nice for you? And for some people, they don't have the capacity to do that. So we have to get to the place where I'm doing this only because I know that Jesus sees it. And I'm not expecting anything else. And that usually is not so much associated with our money and our culture as with our time or with our ability to detach ourselves from our normal schedule and set plan and to-do list to detach to say, I feel like Jesus wants me to go do this. And I may not get any recognition or any understanding of, like, some people will be like, you're crazy, why are you doing that? And your only response is, because I feel like Jesus is asking me to do it, and he sees it, and I'm doing it for his glory. So back to finances real quick. I don't know why, because we don't talk about finances much. But in a couple of weeks, we're going to do our recap for 2025. And it's interesting, not that we don't have any idea what we're going to end up, but we don't know if we're going to be to the plus or to the minus. Like, we just say, God's got it. And sometimes we're in the plus and sometimes we're in the minus. And some people's giving is based on that. Like, oh, the church is in the red, I need to step up and I need to contribute. Or the church is in the black, we're good, and I can rest on my laurels. And the fact of the matter is, we don't present the finances for that. We present the finances for accountability and just transparency to say, this is where we're at, and this is what we've given away, and this is what we've done with the money that God's brought into Church of the Beach. But our giving should never be based on the bottom line of last year's thing. Our giving should be based on what is God saying to me, and I'm accountable to him, that only he's going to see. Because our leadership does not ever see it. And some people think that that's crazy. And we say, we're men, we're human. We know that we don't want that going on inside of our heads. And so we're clueless of who does what. Because it's not about the praise of man. It's not for us to go, man, we got to make sure we're making sure we're on track with that person because they give a lot of money. Like, that's just so broken. That's so much religion and tradition of men that we just stay out of the noise. And I'm able to preach freely to go, hey, we're supposed to give what God has put on our hearts because he loves a cheerful giver. That no one gives begrudgingly. No one gives going, I can't believe I have to give this money. Like, if that's your heart, don't give, but don't stay there. Ask God to change your heart. And so as we do this in a couple weeks, I want the backdrop to be, I'm so glad this message is before that happens, right? Because if we find out we're like, oh, we're in the red, it's like nobody's panicking. God has provided for almost 20 years now. It's all good. But our giving should not be based on that. And so as we spend time with the Lord this next week saying, hey, if you could just highlight 4 verses that would be like my phylacteries, but please don't come in next week for phylacteries. Don't go research that and come in, I found 4 phylacteries and I'm wearing them. Like, I guess that would be okay. Just weird, right? But definitely spend time to get those scriptures and maybe write them and maybe post them on your mirror or put them in your car or put them in your office at work or put them on your computer screen. Like, here's just 4 scriptures that I want to highlight and then ask God for the opportunity to share those. And in the same way that we do that we would do whatever we do, not for the praise of men, not for looking for appreciation, but just doing it for the glory of God. And so the last verse, because we always think this thing of, well, nobody's supposed to see anything I do. That's just not true. People are supposed to see what we do, just not for the motives that we want them to see it for. And so Matthew 5:16 is how we're going to wrap up. Jesus is talking, and it's in the Sermon on the Mount, and he's saying things that are completely countercultural, like the meek will inherit the earth. And the religious leaders are going, no, you got to fight for that. Jesus is like, no, meekness is where it's at. So in Matthew 5:16, he says in the same way, after he's told all these countercultural ideas, he says to let your light shine before others. What does that mean? He says, don't put it under the table. Like, put it up so that people can see. You're like, I thought that goes against everything we've just talked about this morning. It doesn't, if our hearts are right. And she says, if we get to a place where our sole focus is to praise Jesus and to give him glory and to give him honor and not draw attention to ourselves, that as we let our light shine before men, he'll take care of the next thing so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. So the first part we can all do, right? I'm going to let my light shine before men. The next part we either take control of to give glory to ourselves, or we surrender it to the Lord and let him do the next thing, which means people will see your good works and they'll give glory to the Father. And when they come and commend you, thank you so much for doing that. Don't just like we all do, oh, it wasn't me, it was the Lord, right? Now just go, thank you. But really, the Lord should get the glory. Like the Lord opened up this opportunity, or the Lord gave me those words to speak to you, or the Lord gave me a scripture. Like, thank you, say that, but then direct it back up to the God. But you know what? God's the one that really orchestrated this conversation or